right at the beginning of the war, about a month and a half after the war begins, we're going to have this event. Now, Scapa Flow is Britain's primary naval base. It's in Scotland, so it's in the north of the islands, okay? Scapa Flow is in the north of the islands there. Well, on October 14th, 1939, a U-boat captain named Gunther Prien sailed the U-47 into Scapa Flow. Now, supposedly, before the war had begun, he had actually visited Scotland and taken pictures of this in anticipation of maybe one day having to try to do it. That's kind of apocryphal. I don't know that actually happened or not, but that was one of the stories that's put out there. There may be some truth to it. But Gunther Prien, he takes this U-boat into the harbor. Now, the harbor, of course, has anti-submarine netting. It's got defenses to defend against something like this happening. And yet, it's a very bold move by Prien here. So he sails into the harbor and he fires 7 torpedoes at the British battleship, the Royal Oak. While it's in port, right? It's not out at sea, it's in port there. 835 crewmen, including an admiral, were killed in this attack. 835 crewmen, including an admiral, were killed in this attack. 3 days later, Gunther Prien returns to Germany, and he is a hero. He was hailed as the man who penetrated Britain's most heavily defended port and took out a British battleship. Now, if you take out the battleship and they killed Prien afterward and they sunk the U-47, that's a pretty good trade, a battleship for a submarine. Okay, but he does it. It's not a trade. He makes it back. Takes no casualties. Right? It's a humiliation for the Royal Navy. It's an absolute humiliation for the Royal Navy. But this is a very dramatic moment right at the beginning of the war where this skilled crew, captain and crew, are able to use a relatively low-cost weapon to destroy one of the biggest weapons that the British had available. So it's a very kind of David and Goliath story, but it illustrates a greater point. And that is, battleships are not a U-boat's primary target. This was just a really good moment for the Germans. But U-boats will be used primarily by the Germans in this war to attack what? Cargo ships. Britain is an island, and it is absolutely dependent in 1942, as true today. It's absolutely dependent on what it can import. When I was in Hawaii last week, I went to there's a U.S. Army base there, or a museum there, and they have the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has kind of like a little, educational thing that they talk about what the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers do, because they constantly have to do works on the island. I think Waikiki Beach was made by the Army Corps of Engineers. It's not a natural beach, And they mentioned in this video that 80% of everything that is consumed in Hawaii is brought from somewhere else. 80%. If heaven forbid civilization fell apart, they'd be eating themselves alive in Hawaii, right? And that's kind of true of Britain on a smaller scale. I don't think it's quite as high as 80%. I'm sure it's not. But in order to maintain the population on that island, they have to import a lot. And this was true in World War II. It's even more true today. And so the whole point of the usage of U-boats in World War II for the Germans is not to go after these high-priority targets like battleships, but to go after merchant ships. And increasingly, those merchant ships are carrying war supplies. But even just basic supplies like food is essential. In fact, during the Second World War, or rather in his memoirs, Winston Churchill will say that during the Second World War, he never lost any sleep. He could always just fall right asleep whenever he wanted to, and get a good night's sleep, and nothing in the war ever disturbed that, except at the height of the crisis, on a couple of occasions when the crisis reached its height with the U-boat war. He was desperate that, I mean, Britain had to get supplies, it had to have food, it had to have all of these things.